In Eternity, Two Lines Intersect by Mark Samuels. A week after my release, I finally found accommodation. It had not been easy, and I had viewed several flats which, though suitable, were beyond my limited financial resources. The doctors had advised me that my reintegration into society should be gradual and unhurried, for it was likely to be still some time before my nerves began to fully recover and I could once again feel comfortable interacting with strangers. They gave me pills to assist with the anxiety attacks to which I was subject, and assigned me a psychotherapist whom I was to visit on a weekly basis. The flat was located on the top floor of one of a row of 3-story buildings set slightly back on a busy trunk road in the north of the city. The hum of its passing traffic produced a constant background noise. The structures dated back to the 1890s and must once have formed a series of houses owned by tradesmen, for the frontages of single-story shops abutted onto the outside pavements in front of the houses. All had been divided into flats during the passing of many years. They were uniform, nondescript, dreary and depressing, like a set of ill-fitting dentures. The particular flat into which I was to move my few belongings had been vacated some weeks previously, its former tenant having apparently quit the place, giving no notice. The rent had been several months in arrears, and when the owner came to serve an eviction notice, he found no sign of the property having been recently occupied. The gas, telephone, and electricity supplies had all been cut off due to non-payment. There were a few tins of foodstuffs remaining in the makeshift larder, but the refrigerator was empty. There was little chance of his having committed suicide. Certainly, no body fitting his description had turned up, and there was no evidence of foul play by a third party. The owner told me it was his personal opinion that the former occupier must have fled the country. This made sense, since he had left all of his personal belongings behind, such as his clothes, his small library of books, furnishings, etc. Naturally, it would normally be highly disconcerting to have moved into a place wherein all the contents were a reminder of the tastes and presence of a man no longer there, but in my case it proved a welcome distraction. I had virtually no possessions of my own, and advised the landlord to leave the flat as it was and not to clear it out, since I had no qualms about occupancy in its current state. He made no objection. There could be little profit to be made from selling off the remnants the former tenant had left behind, unless one specialized in the second-hand trade. Therefore, with my own past consisting of events painful for me to recall, and with scant prospects of any meaningful future, I slipped instead into the past of another man, one who had vacated his own place in the universe. I passed my days looking for a job, but found the stigma of long absence from regular employment to be a near insurmountable barrier. Eventually, I managed to secure a part-time position stacking shelves in a local supermarket, where I worked alongside a group of people considerably younger than myself. It was robotic and intellectually undemanding labour, and my imagination battened on the life of the man whose past existence I now partially occupied. In the evenings, when I returned from my employment, I would sit gazing out of the window and read one of the books left behind, or else listen to his radio set. I had not adjusted the frequency dial, so presumably it was tuned into the station he, too, would have last heard. He had not owned a television set. The immediate view out of the window was uninspiring. Below, an endless stream of traffic passed along the dual carriageway. When it rained, which was often, there was a hissing sound as the vehicle's rubber tyres gripped the tarmac, and the wet surface reflected back the sodium orange haze cast by the lofty streetlights. On the opposite side of the trunk road there loomed a neo-Gothic church. Its dusty and cracked windows were invariably dark, and there were no signs of human occupancy. It appeared services of religious worship had been abandoned there some considerable time before. In the expanse behind this building there arose a massive hill covered with yew, silver birch, sycamore, elder, oak, and hornbeam trees. It was a survival of immemorial woodland that had somehow escaped the encroachments of urban development that had sprung up all around it. My attention often turned to this reminder of the past when I sat at the open window to watch the enormous mass of trees swaying in the wind and hear the rustle of innumerable leaves, as if the trees were whispering secrets to one another in the night. I had not been subject to such strange ideas before, and could only put them down to the influence of the books I had been reading, drawn from the small library of the former tenant. They were books of myths and legends, chronicles of ancient history, and a series of pamphlets relating to rural spaces that still existed within the metropolis. From one of them I learnt the name of the former tenant, for he had scribbled his signature in pencil on the flyleaf, Ambrose Crashaw, and he had dated it half a decade ago. And then came the day when I began to don his clothes. I had brought few of my own with me, and the large wardrobe in the flat contained a series of suits and shirts. None were brand new, but all were presentable enough, with only occasional marks of fraying at the cuffs or slight wearing at the elbows or knees. They fitted me perfectly, as if I had worn them myself for years. About them there lingered some faint aroma of incense, or even of wild roses. In addition to these items, I discovered, in a smaller closet, a navy blue felt Trilby hat, and several pairs of brown and black Oxford brogue shoes. They, too, all fitted me perfectly. I was so pleased with my new apparel that I discarded my old clothes. I put all of the fashionable jeans, t-shirts, and denim jackets I formerly wore into bin liners and dumped them on the doorstep of a nearby junk shop. When I went to work at the supermarket, wearing my new apparel, my colleagues regarded me with scarcely concealed amusement. One of them told me I was dressing like an old man, and my supervisor seemed actually put out by my appearance, as if I had chosen to dress in a manner injurious to his own authority, for I eschewed the employee uniform I was supposed to wear. Only management in the company wore shirt and tie, he explained, quietly yet firmly to me, after I had been summoned to his office. I am afraid that a scene resulted, since I had not yet worked more than a week of my probationary period. He decided that, because I felt I could not adhere to company guidelines in so basic a matter as the dress code, I should seek alternative employment immediately. I returned to my flat and sat around during the afternoon, wondering what I was to do. Provided I was able to live frugally, I calculated that my money would last for another month. At the end of that period, I would either have to find another job or else apply to the state for welfare support. Then again, it was possible that, before that fateful time arrived, I would have entirely transposed myself into the life of Ambrose Crashaw, and such considerations would be superfluous anyway. As the afternoon passed into evening, I was roused into a fit of speculation and began to see a strange connection linking the books that formed his library. Some of them contained his pencil notes in the page margins, and these insights into his thought processes took possession of my mind. And when finally I put the books away and turned on the radio set, I found that it must have been broken, for the faint signal drifted aimlessly back and forth between channels, moving across frequencies, harbouring ghostly voices speaking in English, Flemish, Spanish, German and French, as if all the mighty dead of Europe were echoing the strange sentences that Crashaw had added to the margins of his books. I sat listening to the noise for an hour or more, and only towards the end of that period did I notice the gradual transformation that was taking place, for the voices and the static I heard slowly blended into and were then replaced entirely by the sound of the leafy whispering of a vast multitude of trees. Shaken by the occurrence and doubting my own senses, I flung open the window and leant out into the night air. In the distance, the woodland hill was alive in the wind, its vast mass of swaying branches and leaves, all bathed in moonlight, with an aureole of silver at its summit, and it seemed the hill formed one of the primal sources of the unearthly sound that issued from the radio set like an echo. I thought how glorious it would be if the natural world, instead of men, had recourse to communication via machines, and if it finally occupied all of the artificial constructs of humankind, one by one, for its own purposes. If man's dominion were over, weeds would overrun the network of roads and railways within a few months. Ivies and vines would begin to strangle the tower blocks and skyscrapers, and all computers would be riddled with lichen, producing only spores. Whole cities would be reclaimed by nature after a few years, leaving only ruins, as lost and vainglorious as those of earlier civilizations, such as the Incas of the Andes, the Toltecs of northern Mesoamerica, or the Mayans of the Yucatan Peninsula. But some few men and women would linger on and tell tales by firelight of the horrors they had experienced before the newborn days of secret wonder had returned, back when they had looked grimly to the skies for stars, but seen only the glare of electric lights blotting them out, when their souls sought for the sacred mystery and they were given instead the gruel of materialism, when ancient wonder was drowned out by self-referential ideologies, when eternal truth was a matter thought fit to be decided by vote, when science ceased to be held to account for its part in the flaring of mushroom clouds, in gas chambers, in lobotomies, in pollution and the rape of natural resources, and when the value of a man was judged by his utility as a cog in the societal money-trading machine. I believe that this alteration regarding my view of the world opened the door to another stage of initiation into mystery. Whereas previously I had regarded the red brick church opposite my dwelling as nothing more than a shell, now I began to suspect it harboured some secret whose profundity had been denied to me before. Crashaw had written in his marginal notes of seeing a cup hidden in a secret church away from commonplace men, scrawling a series of stream of consciousness sentences in his notebook entitled Meditations on the Great When. Crashaw had dwelt on the interior aspect of the Graal and had come to believe that it only manifested itself when the beholder was infused with inner vision, in a spiritual reality transcending any material and historical survival. The Graal was the essence of the Holy Spirit, and might take unto itself an avatar of the basest type, of a common vessel wrought in cracked wood, and its wonders would be apparent only to those who gazed upon it with eyes cleansed by the fire of divine imagination. I cannot recall exactly at what stage it was that I first glimpsed the fantastic glow from one of the upper windows of the neo-Gothic church, but I know that it was during a sunset of magnificent splendour, when the sky was aflame with crimson, purple, and red hues, like a canvas by Turner, and the streets around me were suffused with an apocalyptic radiance, as if the very souls that dwelt therein were reflecting the luminance of their ultimate source. It was as the light of the sunset began to dim and the shadows of evening took hold that I saw clearly the glow gaining in strength. Like a beacon it blazed, in an iridescent mixture of unearthly hues, intensifying by the minute, as the intolerably beautiful colours streamed outwards from the hollow of a wooden cup of no especial design. I thought of the church's stained glass window having been kindled into life, and of the sacred vision that no man might gaze upon and long remain of this world. My dreams began to be affected. Previously, when I slept, I could scarcely remember them, and, even when I did so, they were merely a disordered repetition of commonplace events. But now they took on a fabulous character, and I could recall them in vivid detail upon awakening. Moreover, they had none of the hallucinatory quality we associate with dreams, but seemed just as real when I experienced them as seem the events of waking life. And yet, for all their clarity, they differed profoundly from this type of waking consciousness. Time had ceased to exist, and my perceptions formed part of an indeterminate totality rather than part of a sequential process. Imagine, if you will, that a man's life is a hall of mirrors reflecting all the states of consciousness, all memories, all hopes and dreams, and all of the thoughts one ever experiences. And, as night followed night and dream followed dream, I became aware that my own reflection was missing. In this maze of intolerable magnitude, wherein not only the lives of all other men were housed, living and dead across thousands of centuries, but also the records of whole civilizations that have risen and fallen, the record of our own world, and even the stupendous gulfs beyond. Nowhere was there to be found a glimpse of my own being. My brain revolted at the scope of such visions, and my recollection of them afterwards was fragmentary and disjointed, as if the organ itself was not capable of assimilating all the information to which it was exposed, as if I had partaken of the dreams of God. And when I awoke after these dreams, there were physical manifestations connected with them. At first, these consisted of headaches, of a dizzying confusion, a dry mouth, or else a sense of exhaustion. But they soon took on a stranger character, until I awoke with bruises, cuts, or burns. Of course, I initially put these down to somnambulism, though I had never sleepwalked before. But then the manifestations became stranger still, and I awoke with objects strewn over the bedclothes. A few examples of these were flowers not native to this country, pages torn from books that I did not own and in languages I could not understand, a fob watch 100 years old, but in such good condition it might have been purchased the day previously, a sepia photograph of a Roman amphitheatre, a 17th century knight chess piece carved from ivory, and a bizarre compass whose needle apparently pointed east, at least by reference only to the lettering on the circumference of its face. After several nights of such phantasmagoria, I could sleep no more. My brain appeared to have taken refuge from the dreams by refusing to shut itself down. Insomnia took hold of me, and I passed the nights in a daze, not mindful of time, noting the passing of the days only when sunlight gave way to darkness. I would then sit for hours, gazing at the upper window of the church, awaiting the first appearance of the glow from the mystical cup, and being entranced by it thereafter. Its radiance streamed in celestial glory like the aurora borealis, reaching out from the hollow of the vessel into the night sky, and I marvelled at those who made their way past on the street below, seeming not to see the incredible wonder. Had then my vision been purged of the veil separating men from reality, while the rest of mankind stumbled blindly onwards in the common round of life? I knew that the dreams I had experienced had thrown open a gate to the fantastic, but had those dreams, now denied to me in sleeping, begun to shift into the waking world? The objects I had brought back from my sojourns in unconsciousness were quite real. Even now they stood upon the mantelpiece, and at any moment I could pick them up. They did not fade into nothingness. What was dream and what reality? Of course it had occurred to me before. Why did I not simply cross the street, gain entrance to the church opposite, and take possession of the cup? But, I thought, was any mortal man worthy to be entrusted with its keeping? And yet I reasoned to myself, by way of an objection to that argument, what man alive had dreamed such dreams as I? What man had brought back with him from such dreams tokens of their being more than merely earthly dreams? What had Ambrose Crashaw, the former occupant of these rooms, done? Had he seen what I had seen and taken the final decisive step in the process I myself was undergoing? Had he dreamed what I had dreamed and decided to try and approach the cup? Perhaps he had been entirely subsumed into the mystery, and this was the cause of his complete disappearance from this world. And yet, what place had I in this world anyway? I had not played its game according to the rules, and had been expelled. I was a mere absence. The end came after the night I slept for the final time, when days of insomnia gave way to unconsciousness, and I found myself again in the Hall of Mirrors. For therein I discovered the reflection of Ambrose Crashaw, and all the secrets were laid bare. He and I were the same person, and it was from his amnesia that I had suffered. And clutched in my hand were the preceding pages, memories or prophecies written down whilst I was still asleep, a transcript from the impressionistic book of my existence. Later, I went out into the night, crossed the street, and gained entrance to the church. Within the dusty confines of its labyrinthine passageways, in an upper room, the cup awaited my presence. Its radiance was like a blossoming rose of flame. I held it aloft, went back the way I had come, and bore it out onto the street, marvelling as night became day, as if within my hands I carried the rising sun. All along the street doors opened, and the inhabitants poured forth from out of their homes, their eyes full of tears and wonder. The nightmares from which they had suffered were wiped away, and their souls freed from their prison of modernity. They had recovered their real lives and supernal purpose, and cries of delight at the release from their former bondage rang out like the fanfare of an angelic host. They skipped and danced for joy, forming a procession, as I led the way upward toward the wood on the hill, the cup borne on high like a beacon. And in the fragrance of the hollow of the ancient wood, at the summit of the hill, we learnt the secret song that the trees sang, and the healing cup was passed round to each who thirsted in turn, and all men drank deep and gladly from its infinitely illumined depths, and the holy ceremony was concluded in glory and splendour, for all sorrow passed away, and the mighty race of men that had once fallen long ago was lifted back up into the magisterial peaks of the supreme kingdom on high.